Hello, I'm audible. Hello, 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 hello,
Yes,
hello.
sir,
I'm
audible.
audible. Okay,
Yes, sir, you are
okay.
audible, sir.
Okay. So good afternoon, friends. Today we have to discuss the remaining topic, which is Unit 2 and 3. We will discuss today most of the portions of Unit 2 and Unit 3 we will cover today. Dr. Ashutosh ji, are you hearing me? Hello, hello, Dr. Ashutosh, please, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, please unmute your mic. Hello, Mr. Ashutosh Mishra, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, please unmute your mic. Hello, hello, Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, could you hear me? Hello, hello. Okay, so we will discuss the topic. I'm just beginning this one. I'm minimizing that. Okay. So yesterday we have discussed so many topics, and today we have to discuss the remaining portion. So I am unmuting all of you, and I am starting my deliberation. Yes. Dr. Ashutosh Mishra, could you hear me? Are you hearing me? Hello, I am audible.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, so I am proceeding. Yesterday we have discussed the background of GST introduction part, as well as I have discussed the provisions pertaining to supply as well as charging provisions. I am just recapitalizing those for those students who have not attended the class yesterday. And now the important point is that whenever we say the applicability of GST, there must be the levy provisions, and levy provisions for GST is section 9 of the CGST or HGST Act, where under the GST is a tax on supply of goods or services and products as well as alcoholic liquor for human consumption is at present outside GST, and remainings are covered in GST at present. So we must note that, and the person who is liable to pay tax is generally known as taxable person. So taxable person is a person who is either registered or liable to be registered. So whenever we say liability to be registered, then we must have a registration under GST. That point we must note that. Then the next point is for important for all of us is that in the case of domestic transaction, petroleum products are outside GST, but in the case of exports, in the case of import of goods, even GST in form of IGST is on import of petroleum products as well as on alcoholic liquor for human consumption. This point also we have noted that. Now, whenever we say supply, supply definition is inclusive one, and every form of supply may be sale, exchange, barter, transfer, lease, license, disposal, etc. All the form of supply, including importation of goods or services as well as export. And not only that, besides this, the supply without consideration in some of the cases also covered. Yesterday we have explained Schedule 1. Schedule 1 of the CGST Act has cases where there is supply without consideration. So even if there is no consideration, still there is liability to pay GST. This point we also note that. Now, the next point we have to discuss, that is very important for all of us, that the taxable events in earlier regime were several taxable regime for several SHUs. So manufacture, for excise duty, the manufacture or production was the taxable events. In the case of services, the provision of service was the taxable event. In the case of VAT or central sale tax, sale of goods was taxable event. Now in GST, the taxable event is supply only. So we must understand that in the case of GST, the taxable events is a single taxable event, which is supply of goods or services. All these provisions we have discussed yesterday. We have also discussed the constitutional provisions pertaining to the GST. Just we have discussed yesterday that the important provisions where Article 246 capital A enabling center and state to impose tax on a single transaction. So in the case of GST, both center and state are imposing tax and collecting tax in the form of CGST or AGST, whereas in the case of interstate transaction, interstate supply, the tax being the IGST, which is being collected by the center, and the enabling provision is in section 2698. Then we have also discussed the provision pertaining to the GST Council, Article 279 capital A in details we have discussed. So GST Council is the apex body for making recommendation for any amendments or any change in the GST. So this point we also note that this was also important point. And besides that, we have also discussed the GSTN, which is the fourth prong for all these implementation for both the taxpayer as well as the GST officers. So all of have a unique and common interface, which is the GST common portal. Now we have also discussed that jurisdiction is also being simplified, and you have to only interact with a single officers or single group of officers of a single department of GST. So jurisdiction also simplified. So all those we have discussed yesterday, and today we have to discuss mainly the remaining portions of unit 2. So what would happen in certain cases now? We have to discuss firstly the classifications of supply. So classification of supply means, because GST is a tax on supply of goods or supply of services, so must we understand whether it is supply of goods or it is supply of services. Accordingly, the rules and the laws has been framed for supply of goods. Separate set of rules has been framed, and in the case of supply of services, separate set of rules has been framed. Is separately for supply of services. Then place of supply is separately designed for supply of goods and for differently for supply of services. So we have to understand whether a particular supply is a supply of goods or supply of services. That point is very important. Whenever we say the classification of supply into supply of goods or supply of services, then we have to refer Schedule 2 of the CGST Act or SGST Act, where under broadly classified all the supply into whether it is a supply of goods or supply of services. I request all the participants to mute their mic, and if they have any question, then they can either in the chat box, they can put those matters into chat box. That is very important. Or they can raise hand as well if any members or any participants have any questions on a particular point, and we will open the session for question answers. If you have any questions, you can either put in the chat box, or you can put those questions at the time of question answer sessions. You can note down those questions on a paper, etc. And I also remind all of you to attend this class, or unable to attend the previous class. So they can approach the video of the class on YouTube channel, which is DNA of GST by CAPP Singh. So you can note down this class, and today we have also enabled. So if for any reason or any constraint, if the video of the class on YouTube channel, but I request ban live class because live class has its own importance where you can put your questions and understand. Okay, so live class is very important. So I all of you must join the view the video we have arrangement for live streaming sessions. So all those videos are uploaded on the YouTube channel. You should go there and you can use and if you accept you not understand it, then you can repeat videos to understand. And in fact, you also subscribe so you get transfer of title in goods. Whenever there is transfer of title in goods, so transfer of title in goods means sale of goods. In simple terms, you can say sale of goods. Whenever there is sale of goods.
एक्सक्यूज मी सर, आपकी आवाज क्लियर नहीं आ रही है, बहुत कट कट के आ रही है आपकी आवाज।
Disturbance. Okay, so internet problem maybe. So whenever there is sale of that supply
Sir,
of
your voice is not audible. Sir?
My voice is not audible. Yes, there was some problem in internet probably.
There is lot
Okay.
of disturbance. We aren't able to hear you.
I'm audible now. I'm audible now.
Now you are
I'm
audible now.
audible now.
Yes, fine, sir. You are audible.
Hello, hello, audible or not?
Yes, sir. You are
Hello?
audible now.
I'm audible or not? I'm audible or not?
You are audible now, sir. You are audible.
Okay, okay, I'm audible. Okay, thank you. So, so whenever there is transfer of title of goods, then it is generally known as sale, and whenever there is sale, it is classified as supply of goods. Then whenever there is transfer of right to use, so whenever there is transfer of right to use, it will be a it will not be a sale, it will be a rental, lease, license, etc. So in that case, it is supply of services. We must note that any transfer of title in goods under an agreement which stipulates property in goods shall pass at a future date to someone, generally known as installment system in our commercial parlance. So it will be also classified as supply of goods. So transfer of title in goods, firstly, then right to use. Whenever there is right to use transfer, then right to use means you have obtained the goods on rental or license or lease basis. So in such a case, it will be supply of services. Whenever there is transfer of title, not at present, but transfer of title at a future date, then it will be commercially known as installment systems, where on the payment of last installment, the ownership will be transferred. So it will be also classified as supply of goods. So just we have discussed that point. So whenever there is any supply of goods, then we have to classify whether title transfer, whether immediately or on a future date. If there is a transfer of title immediately or on a future date, then it is supply of goods. If there is no transfer of title of goods, either immediately or on a future date, then it will be just a right to use. And whenever there is right to use, then it will be a supply of service. So you can understand by this chart. Now I am proceeding further. Then transfer of business assets. Whenever there is transfer of business assets, it will be called as supply of goods. When when the goods of a particular business man used to private use, then it will be supply of service, or non-business use, then it will be supply of service. Even it may be for consideration or without consideration. Then we must note that. Then when a person ceases to be a taxable person, then the person who continue the business of such person must be treated as deemed taxable person, and he have to obtain registration of that. So in the case of person ceases to be a taxable person, it will be treated as supply of goods, except two cases where, number one, if the business being transferred as a going concern to another person, for example, in the amalgamation of two companies, if the new company is formed and taken over the business of those company as a going concern, then it will be a transfer of business as a going concern. The other examples may be if a company has two undertakings, one of the undertaking demerged under the provisions of Companies Act, then the demerged as a going concern, it will be not a transfer, not a supply, then there's no question of any tax, therefore no classification at all. Otherwise, if not a going concern, that will be sale of goods. The transfer will be treated as sale of goods.
आवाज आ रही है मेरी सर आपको?
Next point is very important. We have just summarized all those provisions. Private use, it will be supply of service. So I am just proceeding further. Death of proprietor. Yes, there may be situations where a sole proprietor who was carrying on business has on the death, some other person of the family of that family has continued the business as a going concern, then such transfer of business is not a supply, so there is no question of any classification. If any family members is not interested to continue the business due to any constraint or any other reason, then it will be treated as supply of goods, and accordingly tax shall be imposed. Then the land and building. So just we have understand yesterday we have discussed that anything which is not a goods is a building, and the goods has characteristic that goods must be those who are movable in nature. So land is not movable in nature. So land by default in GST is are classified as service, because broadly the definition of GST is that something which is not a good is supply of service. So land giving on lease, license, or tenancy, easements, etc. to occupy land, then it is supply of service. Suppose I have some land and I have given those land to some business community for storage of goods, scrap, etc. Then it will be supply of service. So giving land to someone for a rent, etc., it is supply of service. Similarly, giving building on rent or lease, or letting out of a building, maybe commercial, residential, etc., it will be supply of service. But mind that the residential building for residential use is exempted from GST. So residential building for residential use is not subject to GST at present due to exemption notification. Then the next point we have to discuss is then there is worst contract. So what is worst contract? Worst contract where the materials as well as labor are being used to perform a certain contracts. So there is a contract. Worst contract will be defined as if there is a contract where the supplier have to use material as well as labor for some fabrication or construction or repair or installation or fitting out or improvement or modification, etc., pertaining to immobile property, then it will be qualified as a worst contract. Whenever we say worst contract is classified in GST as supply of service, irrespective of the quantity of material being used in supply of worst contract. So even though the major portions of supply, major portions of material being used in the works contract, still it will be classified as a supply of service. So we must note that. So we have just discussed the classifications. Then we must understand to note that in the case of importation of goods, we have to pay IGST, and here there is no exception at all. So all the importation of goods is subject to IGST, and it will be paid at the time of discharge of basic custom duty. Just we have discussed. So, and schedule third, yesterday we have discussed schedule third, because those items which are mentioned in schedule third are the case of no supply. No supply means no GST at all, because we have understand in section 9 that GST is a tax on supply of goods. If some transaction or activity is not a supply, then there is no portion of any GST at all. So we have just discussed. Now we have to proceed further to understand whether a particular supply is a supply is whether it is interstate or intra-state. So because in the case of intra-state, we have to pay the tax CGST plus SGST, whereas in the case of interstate, we have to pay the tax IGST. So we have to classify whether a particular transaction is interstate or intrastate. Now we are proceeding in that direction to determine whether a particular supply is interstate or intrastate. So for that we have to refer to section 7, 8 and 9 of the IGST Act, where it is clarified that certain transactions are either interstate, certain transactions are intrastate. So how to determine whether a particular supply is inter or intrastate? Section 7, 8 and 9 clarify those. Now we are referring to firstly this determination to understand how we have to classify those. So firstly we have to classify, whenever we have to determine whether a particular supply is interstate or intrastate, we have to firstly classify and understood whether this transaction or activity is supply or not. If this activity is supply, then we have to proceed further whether it is supply of goods or supply of services, as just we have discussed as per schedule 2 of the CGST Act or SGST Act. We have to classify whether it is supply of goods or supply of services. If it is supply of goods, then we have supply of goods or supply of services classified. Then we have to further go to the IGST Act section 7, 8 and 9, where we can determine whether it is interstate or intrastate. So next point, just section 7, just we have noted that the IGST section, this is important to note that it is IGST section. So IGST Act section 7 has specifically mentioned that where the location of supply and place of supply are in two different states or two different union territory, then it will be treated as interstate supply. So my example, suppose I am in Delhi, I am a supplier of service, I am a chartered accountant, I am supplier of service. Then I am in, suppose, UP, and my client is in Haryana or Delhi or Maharashtra, and if the place of supply is Maharashtra, Haryana, Delhi, matlab place of supply is other than UP, then in such a case the supply will be interstate, and accordingly the tax will be IGST. I am again repeating the example. Suppose I am a chartered accountant practicing in UP, and I am supplying services to my client at Haryana or Maharashtra or any other state except UP, then our supply will be classified as interstate. So how you can determine a particular supply is interstate or intrastate? The thumb rule is that when the location of supplier is in location of supplier and place of supply in two different states or two different union territory, then it will be classified as interstate supply. Whereas if the location of supplier and place of supply both in the same state, it will be classified as intrastate. So accordingly the tax will be CGST and HGST. But mind that While classifying based on this rule, certain transactions are classified as interstate only. So there is diminution in the law where we have to not to make any inquiry or any application of any principle to determine. The legislature has itself classified it as interstate supply. So whenever there is importation of goods into India, by default it is interstate supply, or if there is export of goods from India to outside India, then by default it is interstate supply, no question of any application of any principle. So legislature has itself classified it as interstate supply. Similarly,
Excuse me, sir.
importation of service into territory of India from outside India. Suppose India's businessman has used the services of a advocate or chartered accountant or any other architect or other professionals of outside India, then it will be an importation of service. Whenever there will be importation of service, it will be classified as interstate supply. Similarly, if there is supply from a domestic tariff area units to SEZ units, so as we know that SEZ units are a special economic zone. In UP itself, there is a special economic zone. So even I am in UP, I am a chartered accountant, I am practicing chartered accountant, I am supplying my services to my client in SEZ unit. So SEZ unit is a special economic zone unit. There is act which is known as Special Economic Zone Act 2005, where some incentives or something, a special law has been made to boost our exports from a special economic zone. So if I have supplied some services for authorized operation to SEZ unit or SEZ developer, then it will be classified as interstate supply, although the supplier as well as location of supply is in UP itself, still it will be classified as interstate. Similarly, if the SEZ unit or SEZ developer is providing any supply to the domestic tariff area units, if the even in the same state, that will be classified as interstate. So this point we must note that. And lastly, the residuary provisions where if any supply is not classified as intra-state, then it will be classified as interstate. So this is the default rule. I am again repeating that. Suppose after applying all the provisions of set of rules, if a supply could not be classified as intra-state supply, then by default it will be treated as interstate supply. So this is the residual provision in section 7 subsection 5 clause C. So I have just highlighted that. Now one concept is very important: importation of service. Whenever we say import of service, means the supplier is located outside India, the recipient of supply is located in India, and place of supply of service is in India, then it will be a importation of service. Now next point, section 8, which classify supply as intra-state. So very simple, just we have discussed that if the location of supplier and place of supply both in the same state, then the transaction will be classified as intra-state supply. So the tax will be CGST and SGST. Now the exception is just we have discussed, supply to SEZ unit or developer, it will be interstate. So no, not a question of intrastate, even though SEZ units and DTA units are in the same state. Importation of goods, it is classified as interstate, so no question of intrastate transaction. Then another important aspect is that if some tourists visit to India, tourists are those persons who are visiting India for less than 180 days for some any purpose. So if a tourist is visiting India and they have procured goods from a soap, then it will be classified as interstate accordingly outside the intra-state transaction. So just we have pointed out this. I am skipping this section 9. And whenever we say supplier, so supplier includes agent of supplier. Whenever we say recipient, then agent of recipient is also covered in that. Yes. Now the place of supply. Just we have discussed that if the location of supplier and place of supply in two different estate, the transaction will be interstate. So for determining whether a particular supply as interstate or intrastate, the role of place of supply is very vital, and without a place of supply rules you cannot understood the concept whether it is interstate or intrastate, because to classify a transaction as interstate or intrastate, place of supply is very important. So now we are proceeding to determine whether a place of supply, how to determine place of supply. So place of supply pertaining to goods is specifically mentioned in section 10, 11, and for services, section 12 and 13. All these sections are of IGST Act. So in the IGST Act, specifically it is mentioned that in the case of supply of goods or something transaction pertaining to goods, in the case of import or export, it will be treated as interstate supply. So in the case of import or export, section 11 has specifically mentioned that it will be interstate supply. So export import of goods, nothing to memorize. Whenever say import or export, it will be interstate supply. Section 11 has specifically mentioned that. Now in case of other transactions, we have to refer to section 10. Section 10 has so many rules, so we are discussing section 10 first, then we will discuss section 12 and 13. So now this is the basic system of classification of place of supply rule. So in the case of goods, there are situations where supply involve movement of goods. Whenever we say supply involve movement of goods, meaning thereby due to supply or supply causing movement of goods. So there is movement of goods and supply has nexus. So one there, if our customers say you have to deliver those goods, if suppose supplier is in UP and customer is in Delhi, and customer say you have to deliver those goods to my residence or to my factory, then it will be a supply involved movement of goods. So whenever there is movement of goods due to or caused by supply, then it will be supply involved movement of goods. So supply, whenever we say supply involved movement of goods, there may be two party or three party. Now I am discussing how it is happening. In the case of two party, one is customer and other is supplier. So in the case of two party, very easy. You have to just locate this one, supply involve movement of goods, then location of goods at that time, movement terminates for delivery. So suppose if I am in UP and I am supplier of goods and the customer is in Delhi, and we have to supply as door delivery, meaning thereby we have to deliver those goods to the factory of our customer in Delhi, then it will be the place of supply will be Delhi. So termination of movement is very important. So the place where a movement of goods terminates for delivery to recipient, that location is very important. And if the location terminates in the movement of goods terminates in the state other than the location of supplier, then it will be treated as place of supply in other state. So in our example, if I am in UP supplying goods to a customer in Delhi and we have to make door delivery, then in such a case it will be place of supply will be Delhi. Now the other situation is where there are three parties. So I am just giving you example of three parties so that you could understand. Yes, here supplier of goods Sila is in a state. Now, under agreement, Sila, another party, which is Lakshman, and he is in some other state. Now, other party, third party, who is actually purchasing the goods, Ram, is in some other state. Now, what would happen? Suppose Sila is in Delhi. Suppose Sita, who is actual supplier of goods, is in Delhi. The person to whom goods to be delivered, Ram, is in Bihar, and Lakshman in Gujarat. So just I am Delhi, Lakshman in Gujarat, and Ram in Bihar. So how this example will be understand? Yes, I'm just trying that. So what is the transaction? When Mr. Lakshman had to supply goods to Ram in Bihar, but he has no goods in his possession. So what he has done? He has asked Sita of Delhi that kindly supply the goods or deliver the goods to Ram in Bihar on my behalf. So what Sita will do? Sita will deliver those goods to Ram in Bihar and issue invoice in favor of Lakshman of Gujarat. So here, and Lakshman of Gujarat will issue invoice in favor of Ram of Bihar. So what will happen? Lakshman will collect amount from Ram of Bihar, and Sita will collect amount from Lakshman of Gujarat. So here two sales. One sale is like one transaction where sale from Sita of Delhi to Lakshman of Gujarat, and another sale from Lakshman of Gujarat to Ram of Bihar. So two leg of transaction. Now this rule just we have discussed is referring to the second leg of transaction where a person supplying goods on instruction of others. So in that case, the place of supply will be the location of the person on whose instruction goods being delivered. So in this case, the place of supply in the case of delivery of goods to Bihar and invoicing the same will be Gujarat. So the idea is that because in the case of B2B transaction, we have to transfer those taxes to make them creditable. So to make them creditable, or to when Lakshman of Gujarat will issue invoice in favor of Bihar, then in such a transaction, the place of supply will be Bihar, because ultimately the location of recipient is in Bihar. So the tax first will travel from Delhi to Gujarat and then from Gujarat to Bihar. So finally the destination of goods is in Bihar. So and consumption of goods is also in Bihar. So finally through any number of transactions, the tax will travel to Bihar only, because yesterday we have discussed that GST is a tax, consumption-based, destination-based consumption tax, meaning thereby wherever there is destination of goods or where there is consumer, then the tax will travel to those states. So the effectively the benefit will be those who are underdeveloped states where there are consumers and no major manufacturing activity. Earlier in pre-GST regime, there was origin-based taxation, so all those taxes were being kept at the place where goods are being manufactured, whereas in post-GST regime, the goods, the tax being retained or tax being ultimately deposited or collected to the state where goods being consumed. So this point we have just explained here as well. So the place of supply in this case will be Bihar. In the case of supply from supply by Lakshman of Gujarat to Ram of Bihar, and in the case of Sita to Lakshman of Gujarat, it will be the place of supply will be Gujarat. I have just explained this transaction. Now, if supply does not involve movement of goods, then certainly the in such a case it is an easy transaction. So in such a case, the location of place of supply shall be the location of goods at the time of delivery. So this is easy one. Now, if supply, I've just discussed that. Now, yes, place of supply in the case of assembly at site, if the goods are being assembled or installed at site. So suppose someone of UP has purchased television from Delhi, and this as a sale conditions, installation is very important. So installation of television to be in UP at particular location, then the location of installation shall be the place of supply. So mind that you have to understand the theory of just economic use or economic consumption. That is very important. So where TV or any other goods being installed, that will be the place of supply. So in our example, the supplier of goods is located in Punjab, whereas the recipient of goods is also in Punjab, but in location of supplier and recipient both are in Punjab, but goods to be installed in the state of Bihar. So in such a case, the place of supply shall be Bihar. So ultimately, tax will travel and it will be the destination-based consumption tax. This point we must note that, and this example is also clarifying that. So place of supply could be understand from destination-based consumption tax principle. So all those place of supply provisions are based on that only. Now the next question is, in the case of supply of goods on a conveyance, like conveyance or train, etc. So the location of the place of supply shall be the location where such goods are being taken on board. Suppose a train is running from Delhi to West Bengal, and goods being loaded in Ghaziabad, then the place of supply will be Ghaziabad, irrespective of the place where supplier or recipient is located. So in this case, the location will be the place of supply will be the place where goods being taken on board. This point we must note that. So supply, just we have understand this, we have just discussed. Where place of supply of goods cannot be determined by above provisions, so government is empowered to make a rule. So far government has not made any rule. I think there is no requirement of rule at present. So we have just discussed importation of goods, exportation of goods, place of, etc. Now we have to discuss the place of supply provision pertaining to services. Just we have discussed section 10, which is the place of supply pertaining to the place of supply of goods. Now we are proceeding further to explain the place of supply pertaining to services. So whenever we have to classify the place of supply in case of services, first answer we have to give whether supplier and recipient are located in India. So if both supplier and recipient are located in India, then section 12 shall be applicable, and if supplier or recipient, any of them is located outside India, then section 13 shall be applicable. This is the basic difference between section 12 and 13 as well. Accordingly, the place of supply provision shall be made. Now, importantly, the default rule, that is also known as general rule. So in the case of supply of services, the place of supply provision depends upon the nature of service being provided. So for banking, separate rule; for insurance, separate rule; for works contract, separate rule; for hotel, separate rule; for telecommunication, separate rule. So for the place of supply rule is depending upon the nature of supply of services. But there is a general rule as well. So if supply of services is not specifically otherwise covered in a special rule, then the general rule is that if the supply is between B to B, whenever we say B to B means business to business, in the GST terms, both the supplier and recipient are registered in GST. Whenever we say B to B in GST, matlab both are registered in GST. Whenever we say B2C in GST, then the customer is not registered in GST. So accordingly, you have to understand this concept. So in the case of B2B, meaning thereby if supplier and recipient both are registered, then the location of recipient shall be the place of supply. Suppose I am a chartered accountant. I have to provide some audit service of my client located in Gurgaon, and suppose I am in UP. So in such a case, I am registered in GST. My client is also registered in GST. So we are B2B. In such a case, my client is located in Haryana. Then in such a case, the place of supply will be Haryana. So because both of we are registered in GST, so in such a case, the location of recipient in our case, our client is located in Haryana. So location of recipient will be Haryana, and accordingly the place of supply will be Haryana. So if I am performing my auditing services, then for issuing the invoice for auditing service, we have to mention the place of supply as Haryana, and the transaction will be interstate because I am located in UP, my client is located in Haryana, place of supply is in Haryana. So location of supplier and place of supply is in different state. So that applicable transaction will be interstate and the tax will be IGST. I think I have clarified with this example almost 3-4 concepts. Then if the recipient is not registered in GST, then it will be called B2C supply. In such a case, the location of recipient, if the address of recipient is in the record of supplier, then the address of recipient will be considered as place of supply. If address is not mentioned, like cash vouchers or cash memo, where the customer is not providing you details where he belongs and he paying cash only to you. So in such a case, the address of the supplier will be taken as place of supply. So in the case of counter sale, counter supply of services, it will be the location of supplier of service shall be the place of supply. So in our example, suppose a person, I am a mobile repair shop, and someone approached me not providing much details from where he has approached. Suppose he is from Delhi and I am a mobile shop at Vaishali. So in such a case, the transaction will be interstate. However, if the customer does not provide his location or address is not with the supplier, then in such a case, the location of supplier will be treated as the place of supply. So in case of mobile repair shop, if the customer does not provide his details, so in all cases the supply will be intrastate and subject to CGST and UPGST as well. So this is the general concept just we have discussed. Now section 12 subsection 3 had specifically mentioned that supply in relation to, directly in relation to immovable property like architect service or decorator service or surveyor or engineer or any other for construction, repair, etc. works contract pertaining to that, all these cases where services is directly related to immovable property, the location of immovable property shall be the place of supply. So suppose supplier is of Delhi and the recipient is of Delhi, and the house to be constructed in Vashundhara, Ghaziabad, then in such a case the place of supply will be UP because the property is located in Vashundhara, Ghaziabad, which is in UP. So the place of supply will be UP, although the supplier and recipient both are located in Delhi. So ultimately the tax will be to the UP government. Finally, the tax will travel to the UP government because property is being located or intended to be located in UP. This point we must note that in the case of rent, etc., right to use immovable property, also the place of supply will be the location of property. So directly related to property transactions of services, the location of property shall be considered as the place of supply. So similar will be the situation. I have just given example pertaining to works contract, as just we have discussed that the works contract is supply of services. So in the case of works contract, we have to determine whether the property is being located. The place of supply shall be the location of property where work to be performed. This point must note that. So it is, whether customer or supplier is located is not of much important to determine the place of supply in the case of envelope property. So I have just explained all these provisions. And if the property is not located or situated in India, but the supplier and recipients are located in India, then the place of supply shall be the location of recipient. So suppose a company of Mumbai has asked us to make a plan for setup of factory in USA. Then in such a case, since the recipient of supply is located in Maharashtra, the place of supply shall be the location of recipient. So in such a case, if I am located, I am a supplier located in UP and the company was located in Maharashtra, though in such a case the place of supply will be Maharashtra, that will be the location of recipient, and this rule will be applicable where the property being located is outside India. So I have discussed details and incidental services also. Besides the direct services, incidental services also covered in this. So, and in the case of performance based services like catering, restaurant service, personal grooming, fitness, beauty treatment, health service, etc., where the services to be performed. So in the case of performance based services, where the services are actually performed shall be very important. So suppose in an example, a beautician of Mumbai come to UP for a beauty treatment of a particular guy, then the actual performance of service is in UP. So in such a case, since the supplier is located in Maharashtra and the place of supply is in UP, the transaction will be classified as interstate and the tax will be IGST. So performance based services, just we have explained. Now the other set of rules is pertaining to training and performance appraisal. If the recipient is registered, then the location of recipient, and if recipient is not registered, then the place of actual performance shall be considered as place of supply. So similarly, if supply of services pertaining to admission to cultural or artistic events or sporting like cricket, etc., in a stadium, then scientific and educational admission to that, entertainment events, amusement park, etc. In all these cases, the important point is the venue or park or event place there, it will be considered as place of supply. The person who are generally organizing these events of cultural, arts, sports, etc. So there are so many companies which are organizing these events. So for them, if they are registered, then the location of recipients shall be the place of supply. Otherwise, the venue of the event shall be important, and that will be taken as place of supply. However, if the event is outside India, then the location of recipient shall be the place of supply. So just I have explained you three sections, subsection 12, 5, 6, and 7. This point we must note that. Then in the case of transportation service, so one is transportation of goods. Then in the case of transportation of goods, if supply to a registered person, then the location of a recipient shall be the place of supply. Whereas in the case of unregistered, the first point where goods are being handed over for transportation shall be the place of supply. Whereas in the case of passenger transportation, if to a registered person, then it will be place of supply shall be the location of a registered person. If it is to an unregistered person, then the place where passenger embark on the conveyance for continuous journey shall be considered as a place of supply. And in the case of services on board a conveyance, first scheduled point of departure shall be considered as place of supply. So suppose in a train, Rajdhani train is providing services, or in some other train food or tea or snacks services are being provided to the passengers. In such a case, whether these services are being consumed in UP or Maharashtra or Bihar or Uttar Pradesh or any other state is not relevant. What is relevant is the first scheduled point of departure. So suppose a train is being started from Delhi and the destination is in Odisha. So many states are in between. So in the case of supply of services of food or drink or tea, snacks, etc. In every case, whether it is being consumed in UP or Bihar or Odisha or Jharkhand or any other state, the place of supply shall be considered as the first scheduled point of departure, that is Delhi. This point we must note that. So similar is the situations for aircraft as well, because generally aeroplanes are being flying and covering so many states. So there may be dispute whether tax being collected by UP government or Bihar government or Jharkhand government or West Bengal government or Delhi government. So to resolve all those issues, it is considered that the first scheduled point of departure shall be taken as the place of supply, meaning thereby those states having airports shall be beneficial and shall collect all those taxes. So I have just covered up the provisions pertaining to now. In the case of telecommunication services, it is, I think, not important for all of you, so I am skipping. It is just some complex. And in the case of banking services, if the address of recipient is available, then the address of recipient shall be the place of supply. So suppose I am in cross-border area and I am in Delhi. The bank is located in Vaishali. So in such a case, the place of supply will be the location of customer, and location of customer in Delhi. Then the bank will have to charge IGST in that case. In the case of insurance service, if supply to registered person, then the location of recipient shall be considered. Whereas in the case of unregistered person, the location of recipient in supplier record shall be considered. In the case of advertisement, shall be place of supply in different states, then in proportion to that the consolidated advertisement amount will be breakdown. Now we are just proceeding to section 13, which is the place of supply pertaining to the case where either supplier is located outside India or recipient is located outside India. So any of them, supplier or recipient, is located outside India, then the place of supply shall be determined in accordance with provision of section 13. So the general rule, we must understand what is the general rule. General rule is very important. So if here also the place of supply rule is based on the nature of service being provided, the general rule is that the place of supply shall be location of the recipient. So the general rule is the location of recipient shall be the place of supply. Where location of recipient is not available, then place of supply shall be the location of supplier. So that point we must note that. In case of actual performance of service, the place of supply shall be the service where it is actually performed. Just we have discussed the similar provision here also. Then yes, in the case of immovable property, the location where immovable property is being located shall be the place of supply. So all those services pertaining to immovable property shall be place of supply shall be the location of immovable property, or located or being intended to be located. In the case of admission to events or organizing of events where events is being actually held shall be the location of place of supply. So that point we must note that. In the case of multiple steps, the proportionate amount shall be taken. If some parts of events is being taken in India and also outside India, then tax will be levied here in India as well. So in the case of banking services, for account holder, location of service provider, for non-account holder, general rule will be applicable. In the case of intermediary services, so those are intermediary providing intermediary services, then intermediary services shall be the place of supply shall be the location of the intermediary shall be the place of supply. So if commission agent is located in India, then the place of supply will be India. If the commission agent is located outside India, then the place of supply will be outside India. That might we must note that. Then providing transport on hire, the default will be applicable generally, except where hiring for a period up to 1 month. In that case, location of supplier of service shall be considered as the place of supply. Transportation of goods other than mail and courier, the place of supply shall be the destination of such goods. So if the transporter being engaged for export of those goods, in that case the destination is outside India, so it will be considered as export of service. The services of transporter will be considered as export of service, whereas in the case of transportation through mail or courier, the place of supply shall be determined according to the general rule just we have discussed. Transport of passengers, just we know that. Service on board a conveyance. So in the case of flight destined outside India, so the first scheduled point of departure shall be considered as the place of supply of those services. Online information database access retrieval system service, then in such case location of recipient shall be the place of supply. So I have just discussed now import of service we have just discussed. Now the export of service, yes, export of service, whenever we say export of service, so the place of supply must be outside India. So for export of service, 5 ingredients is important. The location of supplier is in India, the recipient is outside India, place of supply outside India, consideration received in foreign exchange, convertible foreign exchange, or in Indian rupees also if permitted by RBI, and supplier and recipient are not distinct person or established person. So just we have discussed the provision pertaining to that. Whenever we say export, export means bringing goods from India to outside India, and in the case of import of goods means bringing goods from outside India to India. Now the word bring is very important. Suppose due to heavy flow of air or wind, some goods from Pakistan comes to India, whether it is import, answer is no, because here the word used is bringing goods into India. Who has brought the goods into India? Answer is no one has brought those goods into India. Due to heavy flow of or blow of air, the goods move from one country to another country. No one has brought those goods into other countries, so it is not an import of goods. Similarly, in the case of export of goods, if I have supplied to a ship some goods without any destination of final destination of those goods, so those goods may be consumables in nature. So since there is no destinations of goods outside India finally, so there is no export of goods. So in general sense, export of goods means bringing goods from India to outside India, and import of goods bringing goods into India from outside India. So I have discussed the provision pertaining to place of supply rules. If any one of you have any questions, so I am just pausing here for question answer session because the next concept is entirely different, that is time of supply. So I am pausing for some moments to for the question answer session. If any of you have questions, you can ask any question. I am just checking whether any questions you have posted or not. So I think in chat no question at all. So okay. Yes, please. Dr. Ashutosh, please unmute your mic. I have unmuted. Please unmute from your side. Please unmute. If I have raised hand, yes, please. Yes, please. Good morning, please.
गुड मॉर्निंग सर, गुड मॉर्निंग।
गुड मॉर्निंग जी, मैं प्लीज।
अच्छा, मैं ये कह रहा था सर, आज आपके ना पीपीटी जो है वो आपने स्क्रीन शेयर नहीं की पीपीटी की।
हैं, आवाज नहीं आ रही आपकी, आवाज बहुत कम आ रही है।
मैं ये कह रहा था, आ रही है आवाज? आ रही है अब?
हैं, हेलो,
आवाज आ रही है? हेलो,
हाँ आ रही है।
आ रही है आवाज?
हाँ आ रही है जी।
मैं ये कह रहा था कि आज आप पीपीटी शेयर करना भूल गए अपनी, शायद पीपीटी शेयर करना भूल गए आप। स्क्रीन में नहीं आ रही थी पीपीटी।
नहीं, पीपीटी सुबह तो शेयर आ रहा था, शायद ये लाइट इंटरनेट की प्रॉब्लम की वजह से
सुबह आ रहा था
ये
कि
नहीं
बाद
आया। ये हो सकता है क्योंकि ये पहले सुबह में तो शेयर किया था तो बोल रहे थे।
हाँ,
सुबह नहीं आ रहा था, सुबह आ रहा था, ये कोई इंटरनेट की वजह से चला गया। हेलो,
अभी फिर आ रहा है सर, अभी फिर आ रहा है।
अब आना शुरू हो गया सर। अब आना शुरू हो गया, अब आ रही है पीपीटी आ रही है अब
शुरू हो गया। हाँ, कोई इंटरनेट की समस्या की वजह से ये हो गया था, मुझे भी नहीं पता चला एक्चुअली।
मैंने चैट बॉक्स में हेलो,
हाँ
चैट बॉक्स में आपको कई बार ही लिखा, मैंने कहा आपकी स्क्रीन शेयर
तो मेरा एक्चुअली क्या है, मेरा ध्यान नहीं रहा। यदि कोई ऐसी प्रॉब्लम हो तो मुझे टेलीफोन कर देने का, मेरा ध्यान नहीं रहा एक्चुअली। ये
करा था, आपके बेटे ने उठाया था तो वो उन्होंने कहा कि आप क्लास में
अच्छा हाँ
तो फिर मैंने फिर चैट बॉक्स में लिख दिया था आपको।
अच्छा, तो एक्चुअली क्या है, मुझे पता नहीं चला, ध्यान नहीं आया जो है। एक्चुअली क्या है, बीच में इंटरनेट एक बार फ्लक्चुएट हुआ था तो इंटरनेट से प्रॉब्लम आ गई थी। कोई बात नहीं, ऐसा है। यदि पीपीटी का भी कोई खास नहीं है जो है। पीपीटी तो हमने कल दिया था, वही है पीपीटी, कल शेयर कर ही दिया था और दोबारा भी अपडेट भेज दिया है। तो नहीं मिला है तो हम दोबारा भेज देंगे। हाँ, कोई क्वेश्चन है तो पूछिए जी। कुछ आपको भी पूछना चाहिए। आप कुछ क्वेश्चन पूछेंगे तो शायद बच्चों को फायदा हो जाएगा, क्योंकि आपको पढ़ाते हैं बच्चों को रेगुलरली। जी, कोई क्वेश्चन कोई पूछ लीजिए, 2-4 क्वेश्चन तो बच्चों को फायदा हो जाएगा। बच्चों का तो चार्ट में नहीं आया है। हाँ, ज्यादा क्वेश्चन नहीं
है कि बच्चों के बिहाफ पे मैं एक क्वेश्चन ये पूछना चाह रहा था
जी।
एक तो आप थोड़ा सा ना एग्रीगेट टर्नओवर के बारे में बता दीजिए।
बहुत आसान है, मैं बताता हूँ। एग्रीगेट टर्नओवर की डेफिनेशन ये है कि टर्नओवर ऑन ए सिंगल पैन, मीनिंग देयर बाय if a company has generally any person has single pan only, otherwise double pan or triple pan is of a punishable offense. The minimum penalty is 10,000. So I believe everyone has single pan only, and pan must be linked with the Aadhaar. So in any case it will be a single pan only. So in case of a single pan, suppose there are so many branches and head office across India, then aggregate turnover means we have to add all those supplies, whether it is exempt supply, whether it is nil rated supply, whether it is exempted supply, whether it is taxable supply, all those supply we have to aggregate. Then finally the figure will be, it includes export import as well. So export it will include, only the exclusion is the inward supply, which is covered under reverse charge. Anyway, inward supply is not your outward supply, it is not your turnover, so it must be excluded as well. So on a single pan, if exempt supply, nil rated supply, taxable supply, export turnover, all these we aggregate, then it will be called as aggregate turnover. I hope I am clear. Yes.
जी, नहीं, बिल्कुल क्लियर हो गया और बच्चों को भी क्लियर हो गया होगा।
जी
सर, ऐसा ना सर कि बच्चों को क्या है कि थोड़े से जो बेसिक कंसेप्ट्स है ना, जैसे डेफिनेशनल टाइप है, क्योंकि 3 मार्क्स में इनके जो क्वेश्चन होते हैं।
तो आज जो हमने कॉन्सेप्ट पढ़ा है, इसमें से कोई और क्वेश्चन है तो पूछ लीजिए जो इम्पोर्टेंट है, तो अभी कवर हो जाए।
इसमें सर थोड़ा सा ये है कि टाइप ऑफ सप्लाई का थोड़ा सा बता दीजिए कि टाइप ऑफ सप्लाई में क्या क्या चीजें जो है ना।
अच्छा, मैं दोबारा कवर करने का कोशिश करता हूँ। देखिए, हमने पहले डिस्कस किया था कि जब भी हम सप्लाई की डेफिनेशंस में सेक्शन 7 में और शेड्यूल 1 में और शेड्यूल 3 में हमने कवर कर लिया कि एक ट्रांजैक्शन सप्लाई है। सो नाउ द सेकंड पॉइंट इज वेदर इट इज अ सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स और सप्लाई ऑफ सर्विस. सो फॉर दैट वी हैव टू रेफर टू शेड्यूल 2 of the CGST Act. Whenever there is transfer of title in goods whether immediately or at a future date, like in the case of hire purchase or installment system, if there is transfer of title in goods either at present or at any future date, then it will be a supply of goods. If there is no transfer of title in goods, then it will be supply of service. This is the broader rule. We must note that. So generally, whenever we say transfer of title or a title, then it will be a sale transaction. Otherwise, the remaining transactions are generally lease, rent, license, etc. So in those cases, since there is no transfer of title in goods, then it will be just right to use. So it will be called as supply of service. In the case of works contract, as we know that works contract in GST regime is only pertaining to immovable property. So works contract is like construction, repair, renovation, etc. pertaining to immovable property. It is a supply of service irrespective of the quantum of material being used in the supply of works contract. It is a supply of service itself. So on these basic parameters or broad parameters, you can classify a supply as interstate or intrastate. And once on this base, you can classify as supply of goods or supply of services. Once we classify it as a supply of goods or supply of services, then we have to apply to classify whether it is interstate or intrastate. If the location of supplier and location of supply and location of supplier and place of supply is in the same state, then it will be classified as intrastate. Whereas if the location of supplier and place of supply is in different state, then it will be classified as interstate transaction. But some of the transaction by default deemed as interstate transaction, where the export is classified as interstate, import is classified as interstate, supply to SEZ units or developers is classified as interstate only, then supply from SEZ unit to domestic tariff units is classified as interstate only, then supply to tourist is classified as interstate. So broadly, these are covered in deeming fiction, and a particular residual rule, if a particular supply is not classified as intra-state under any provision, then by default it will be classified as interstate. And for place of supply rule, for the services, just we have discussed section 12 and 13, where the location where the supplier and recipient both are located in India, section 12 will be applicable. Where if the supplier and recipient, any of them are located outside India, then section 13 shall be applicable. Section 12 there is a rule based on the nature of supply of service, but the default rule is that if we are supplying to a registered person, then it will be address is available, then that address will be considered as place of supply. Address not available, then the location of supplier. समय के लिए उसको बिजनेस करना है, तो हर बार किसी स्टेट में जाके उसको दुकान नहीं बनाना, तो इसलिए नाम उसका कैजुअल है. कैजुअल मतलब टेम्पोरली आया है, कुछ दिन बिजनेस करेगा फिर चला जाएगा, इसलिए उसका नाम कैजुअल है. तो उसके लिए सरकार ने व्यवस्था ये करी है कि जो लोग टेम्पोरली किसी स्टेट में जाके एग्जीबिशन में, जनरली एग्जीबिशन के लिए होता है, एग्जीबिशन में पार्टिसिपेट करना चाहते हैं, तो उनको जीएसटी ऑफिसर्स को अप्रोच करना होगा. एक कितना टेंटेटिव सेल होगा उसके हिसाब से उनको टैक्स एडवांस में जमा करना पड़ता है. जब वो एग्जीबिशन खत्म होने पे होगा तो उनको अपनी सारी रिटर्न भरनी पड़ेगी. जब वो रिटर्न भर देंगे तो उनको जो यदि टैक्स ज़्यादा दिया है तो रिफंड मिल जाएगा, कम मिला है तो कम दिया है तो वो टैक्स उनको डिपॉजिट करना पड़ेगा. लेकिन जिस समय हम रजिस्ट्रेशन करते हैं कैजुअल टैक्सेबल पर्सन का, तो मुझे टेंटेटिव अमाउंट टैक्स का जमा करना पड़ता है, तभी रजिस्ट्रेशन मिलती है. और वो दूसरे जगह से सामान भी खरीद के ला सकते हैं या अपने साथ सामान ले आएंगे, उनको क्रेडिट मिलता है. सारी सुविधा एक जैसी ही है, बस ये है कि उनका रजिस्ट्रेशन टेम्पोररी है तो उनको टैक्स एडवांस में जमा करना पड़ता है, क्योंकि सरकार को ऐसा लगता है कि दूसरे स्टेट से आया है, रातों रात भाग तो नहीं जाएगा, ट्रेन पकड़ा और भाग गया जो है, तो इसीलिए उनसे टैक्स एडवांस में ले लिए जाते हैं. और ये सिमिलर प्रोविजन वैट रिजीम में भी था।
जी।
तो ये क्लैरिटी है इसके बारे में जी।
तो जो कैजुअल टैक्सेबल पर्सन होता है सर,
हाँ हाँ,
उसके लिए रजिस्ट्रेशन की कोई थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट एप्लीकेबल नहीं है, इसका
ना
मतलब?
नहीं है, उसके लिए थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट इसलिए नहीं है क्योंकि वो दूसरे स्टेट से हमारे स्टेट में आया है, और वो कितना 20 लाख बेचेगा, 10 लाख बेचेगा, 1 करोड़ बेचेगा, ये तो जानकारी तक नहीं है
जी।
स्टेट को, ना किसी को जानकारी नहीं है। और क्योंकि वो सामान दूसरे स्टेट से जनरली लाता है, तो वैट रिजीम में भी जब दूसरे स्टेट से सामान, दूसरे स्टेट का सामान हमारे स्टेट में बेच के भाग जाएगा, तो उसको इसका मतलब है यूपी का आदमी दिल्ली में गया, सामान बेच के भाग गया, तो दिल्ली सरकार को तो लॉस हो गया। तो इसीलिए ये रजिस्ट्रेशन तो थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट नहीं होनी चाहिए, आइडियली नहीं होनी चाहिए। और यही वैट रिजीम में भी था, यही जीएसटी रिजीम में भी है, क्योंकि दूसरे नहीं तो दूसरे स्टेट का सामान दूसरे स्टेट में बेच के और भाग जाएगा। मान लीजिए दिल्ली से चला, यूपी में सामान बेचा, वसुंधरा में, और फिर दिल्ली भाग गया। हाँ, तो इसीलिए इसीलिए सेंट्रल सेल टैक्स एक्ट में भी यही प्रोविजन था कि वहां कोई थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट वहां भी नहीं थी। एक स्टेट से जब ही आप क्रॉस बॉर्डर ट्रांजेक्शन करते हैं तो कोई थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट नहीं होती थी वैट रिजीम में। जीएसटी में भी क्रॉस बॉर्डर ट्रांजेक्शन करने पे कोई थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट नहीं है। यदि आप एक स्टेट, मान लीजिए हम दिल्ली में हैं और हम यूपी में किसी को सामान बेचना चाहते हैं, यदि हमने 10,000 का सामान भी बेचना है तो हमारे लिए थ्रेशोल्ड लिमिट कुछ नहीं है, हमें रजिस्ट्रेशन लेना ही पड़ेगा।
जी 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 जी
जी, तो कैजुअल टैक्सेबल पर्सन भी ऐसा ही करता है, क्योंकि वो कहीं से सामान ले आता है और दूसरे स्टेट में बेचता है, तो वो भाग सकता है, इसलिए उसे एडवांस में टैक्स ले लिए जाते हैं। ये प्रोविजन वैट में भी था और जीएसटी में भी आइडेंटिकल प्रोविजन है। जी प्लीज।
जी जी जी
जी, और कोई क्वेश्चन है तो बताएं।
बस यही है। बाकी बच्चों के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से एक चीज ये है कि बहुत बेसिक क्वेश्चन है,
हाँ
और बच्चों को कई बार लगता है कि बच्चों को आना चाहिए ये।
हाँ, आना चाहिए जी। कोई भी कोई भी क्वेश्चन है ना, तो काम आसान हो जाएगा, बच्चों का काम आसान हो जाएगा, यदि बच्चों को समझ आ जाएगी तो अच्छा रहेगा।
इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स के बारे में एक बार जो है ना थोड़ा सा।
जी, ये ऐसा है, इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स की जब बात करते हैं, इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स में इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स आप कस्टमर पे पास ऑन कर सकते हैं। डायरेक्ट टैक्स में इनकम टैक्स है तो आप इंसिडेंस किसी और को पास ऑन नहीं कर सकते, ये टैक्स आपको ही बियर करना पड़ता है। इनडायरेक्ट टैक्स में भी टैक्स तो टैक्सेबल पर्सन से लिया जाता है, लेकिन वो टैक्सेबल पर्सन दूसरे से टैक्स कलेक्ट कर सकता है। सेक्शन 32 और 33 में स्पेसिफिक प्रोविजंस है। 32 में प्रोविजंस है कि यदि आप जीएसटी में रजिस्टर्ड हैं तो आप इनवॉइस पे टैक्स का अमाउंट मेंशन करिए और आप कस्टमर से टैक्स का पैसा ले सकते हैं। ये लॉ में भी बेसिक लिखा गया है कि यदि कोई इनवॉइस पे टैक्स मेंशन कर देता है तो और जो गवर्नमेंट है, जीएसटी के ऑफिसर्स जो है वो प्रिज्यूम करेंगे कि इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स पास ऑन हो गया है, उनको ऐसा मान लिया जाएगा कि इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स उन्होंने पास ऑन कर दिया है। यदि इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स पास ऑन नहीं किया है तो सप्लायर को खुद प्रूफ करना पड़ेगा कि हमने ये टैक्स पास ऑन नहीं किया है। यदि टैक्स लगा है और बाद में सप्लाई कैंसिल हो गई या कुछ भी हो गया तो ये टैक्स मुझे रिफंड दे दिया जाए। तो इंसिडेंस ऑफ टैक्स का मतलब है you are transferring or you are collecting those taxes from other person, meaning thereby you have not paid the tax from your own pocket, you have to collect, and you have collected those tax from other guys, so it is not a burden on you, you have not bear those taxes from your own pocket unlike income tax. जी प्लीज।
जी 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 सर,
क्लियर
बढ़िया।
हो गया, क्लियर हो गया।
बिल्कुल क्लियर है जी।
जी
जी राइट
जी, तो आगे आगे चलें हम लोग।
राइट राइट।
Okay, so now the next concept, important concept is the time of supply. Just we know that GST is a tax on supply. So, but taxable event supply, no doubt about it. But when we have to discharge the tax liability, so it is not that as soon as you are making supply, you have to pay the taxes. Answer is no. You have to discharge the tax liability. For discharging the tax liability, there is a concept of time of supply. So again, it is based on whether it is supply of goods or supply of services. For supply of goods, section 12 has a specific provision, and in the case of supply of services, section 13 of the CGST Act has a specific provision. Now I am discussing that. Now there may be situations where I have sold the goods, but I have not recorded those sale of goods in our books of accounts. Can I defer the tax liability? Answer is no. Then other situations may be where where we have supplied the goods, we have sold the goods, but we have not issued invoice, then whether we can skip the tax liability? Answer is no. Then there may be another situations where we have issued invoice, but we have not supplied any goods. So whether we have to discharge the tax liability? Answer is yes. So there are so many situations where we are under obligation to discharge tax liability. So we have to just discuss those concepts when there will be liability to pay the tax arise on the supplier of goods. Now I am discussing that point. Now there may be situations where there may be situations where the date of invoice by which you should issue. So there is a concept in GST where there is the maximum time limit by which you must issue invoice. What is the time limit? Suppose I have sold some goods to other person and I have not issued invoice, then it is a mistake, and this mistake or this offense may cost to or lead to penalty under the provisions of GST. So the equivalent amount of penalty may be there. So how this will be tackled? So before delivery of those goods, we must have to issue invoice for supply of goods. So before delivery, before handing over those goods to the recipients or any other person on behalf of recipients, we have to issue invoice. So that point we must note that. So the invoice or the payment, whichever is earlier, there is tax liability on that. However, in the VAT regime on the receiving advance, there was no tax at all. So government has considered this point, and government has relaxed that in the case of supply of goods, there is no tax on advance amount received against supply of goods. So the final conclusion is that in the case of a supply of goods, as soon as you issue the invoice, the liability of tax payment arises. So your liability of tax payment is linked with the issue of invoice. But mind that by delay in issuing the invoice, you cannot escape the tax liability. Rather, you are subject to penalty. And the last date for issuing invoice under provision of Section 31 of the CGST Act is that before or at the time of delivery, you have to issue invoice. This is the basic rule where supply involves movement of goods. And in the case of continuous supply of goods, like in the case of gas or transfer of liquid or supply of liquid, etc., there is the periodic time where invoice to be issued. In the case of sale on approval basis, the time limit, maximum time limit for issuance of invoice is the date on which the assent or consent being given by the person who has to whom we have sent goods. As soon as the approval being given by the customer, then we have to issue invoice. Or if no consent is given within a period of 6 months, then on the 6th month we have to issue invoice. So maximum time period in the case of sale on approval basis, 6 months is the time limit for issuance of invoice. So in all those cases, one point is note that as soon as we issue invoice, the tax liability arises. So suppose in the March we have issued invoice, then in by April 20 we have to deposit the tax. So liability of payment of tax arises in the March, in the month in which we have issued invoice. This is the point. We must note that on advances, at present there is no GST. Advances in respect of supply of goods, there is no GST at all. Earlier the legislature has made the provision, section 12 specifically had, and this section has not been deleted. Rather, government has managed not to pay tax on advance by way of notifications. Just I am referring to notification 66/2017. This is the specific notifications where no need to pay tax on advance. So just we have note that whenever we say, then there's nothing to more about the supply of goods. We have just discussed the basic point. We must note that. In the case of services, yes, in the case of supply of services, we must note that the invoice is also important and receipt of payment is also important. So in the case of supply of service, the tax liability arises in any of these three events. So if we have issued invoice, then the liability arises. If we have not issued invoice, then the liability arises on the receipt of payments. So unless as soon as we receive advance against supply to be made, suppose I am a chartered accountant and I have received some amount for litigation services, then as soon as I receive the advance, I have to discharge tax liability, because tax liability arises in case of services on advance as well. Now, regarding the issuance of invoice, there is provision where the service provider have to issue invoice either before provision of service or maximum within 30 days of provision of service. So, if invoice issued within 30 days of provision of service, suppose I have rendered services in the month of March, then suppose on 15th of March, so I have to issue invoice within next 30 days. So I have to issue invoice by 14th of April 2020. If I have not issued those invoice up to 14th April 2020, then the date of liability will go to the date on which provision of services has been made. So on 15th of March itself become the taxable liability, and on that date we are liable to pay GST on that. So mind that in the case of advances received against supply of goods, there is no tax at present, whereas advances received against supply of services, we have to discharge tax liability. In the case of issuance of invoice, in the case of goods, we have to issue invoice maximum at the time of delivery of goods, whereas in the case of services, we can issue invoice either before provision of service or within 30 days of provision of service. However, in the case of banking, the period is 45 days, etc. So I have just discussed. So in the case of time of supply of services, 2 points is very important: the issuance of invoice and receipt of payment. So if payment is received in advance, the tax liability arises. There is no exemption similar to the advance against supply of goods. So I have just discussed all those points. Whenever we say payments, so payments means payment in the books of accounts as well as payment in the payment entry in the bank, which varies earlier. So suppose I have paid advance and we have recorded those payments in our books of accounts, then the liability to pay arises on that, even though bank has not passed those checks, because the recipient has not deposited those checks. So the next point is pertaining to that is the provisions pertaining to, I have just discussed all these provisions. Continuous supply of services. So in the case of continuous supply of services, you can issue invoice only on the milestone basis, and that will be determined by way of the contract between the supplier and the recipient. So if due date for issuance of invoice is ascertainable, then invoice should be issued by that date. If due date is not ascertainable, then the invoice to be issued on or before the supplier received payments. Whereas in the case of milestone basis, particularly in the case of construction work, where at a particular stage we have to issue invoice, then in this case invoice must be issued on or before the milestone achieved. So particularly useful in the case of construction or works contract service. So in the case of, and as soon as, or we can say the issuance of invoice is the basic documents for payment of tax. So in the case of services, the liability to pay tax arises either on the basis of invoice or on the basis of payment received, whichever is earlier. Now, for issuance of invoice, just we have discussed that invoice could be issued either before provision of service, or it could be issued within 30 days of provision of service. So if we deferred the issuance of invoice, we deferred the payment of tax to the government. So as per law, even in the case of continuous supply of service, issuance of invoice is linked with the terms as mentioned in the contract. So contract is very vital for deferring the payment of tax. So there are provisions for that. Now, in the case of reverse charge, also just we know that in the case of reverse charge systems, where in the case of inward supply, the recipient have to pay the tax, then in such a case, earliest of the following. So the date of receipt of goods or date on which payment made, or 31st day of date of issue of invoice or other documents. So earliest of these three shall be the date on which liability to pay tax arise. Similar is the position for supply of services. Instead of 31 days, it is 61 days. So first point is the date on which we have made payment, the date on which payment debited in the books of account, or 61 days from the invoice or other document issued by the supplier of service. So earliest of these three shall be the date on which liability to pay arise. So this time of provision, time of supply provisions only determine the date on which liability to pay tax arise. This point we must note that. So in the case of these vouchers, the time of supply shall arise the date on which voucher issued if the product to be is identifiable. If product is not identifiable, then the date on which redemption of voucher shall be the time of supply. So in the case you are visiting to the big bazaar or any other company, generally they provide you the vouchers. Against the vouchers, you can redeem those vouchers and purchase any products. In some of the cases, you can purchase a particular product. If it is identifiable, then the time of liability shall arise on the date of issuance of vouchers. If it is not so, then on the date of redemption, the liability will arise, because in that case only the rate of tax we have to quantify. And the residuary provision, if no provision is applicable, just we have discussed, then the due date of filing of return shall be the time of supply and or the date on which tax being paid. So I have just discussed. Now one point is just left out, that in the case of being late fee charge or interest charge or penalty charge for late payment of consideration, then the time of supply shall be the date on which this late payment or penalty or interest being received from the customers. So broadly, I have covered this proposition. In the case of change in the rate of tax, there are 3 points. One point is issuance of invoice, another is the receipt of payment, and third is the सप्लाई. सो एनी टू का पलड़ा भारी है, जिधर ही दो होगा वो रेट ऑफ टैक्स लग जाएगा. सो हमने सप्लाई कर दिया था, इनवॉइस भी इशू कर दिया, पेमेंट नहीं आया तो पुराना टैक्स रेट लगेगा. यदि हमें एडवांस मिल गया था, हमने सप्लाई कर दी थी, इनवॉइस रेज नहीं किया तो भी पुराना टैक्स रेट लगेगा. यदि हमने इनवॉइस रेज कर दिया था, सप्लाई नहीं करी थी, पेमेंट नहीं आया तो नया टैक्स रेट लगेगा. सो इस तरीके से ये प्रोविजंस काम करता है. तो हमने ये आपको कवर, टाइम ऑफ सप्लाई भी हमने कवर कर दिया. अब हमारा जो टॉपिक है, जो सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट टॉपिक है, वो है वैल्यूएशन. सो वी मस्ट अंडरस्टैंड हाउ टू वैल्यू द सप्लाई, व्हाट टू बी इंक्लूडेड एंड व्हाट आर टू बी एक्सक्लूडेड while valuing the supply. That point we must note that. Section 15 of the CGST Act has a specific provision to value the supply, because just we have mentioned in section 9 that GST is a tax on supply of goods or services, but for quantification of the tax, two things is very important. One, the value of supply, and other, the rate of tax. So on the value of supply, we have to apply the rate of tax, then the amount of tax will be quantified. So now the important point is that how to value the supply. So section 15 has a specific provision for that, to value the supply. Now section 15 has 5 subsections: 15, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Now we will discuss how the valuation rule is in this the supply mechanism. So yeah, here. So there may be situations where price is the sole consideration, or supplier and recipients are not related persons. So if these two conditions are satisfied, what are the conditions? If the price being charged is the sole consideration for supply, and supplier and recipient are not related persons, then the transaction price shall be considered as the value of supply, and on that we have discharged the tax liability. However, if the supplier and recipients are related persons, or price is not the sole consideration, then we have to refer the valuation rule. That point we must note that. So there is rule from 27 to rule 35 for the valuation, but valuation rules is applicable only when the seller and buyer, or supplier and recipient are not related, are related persons, or price is not the sole consideration. Whenever we say sole consideration, means the total consideration. So the thumb rule is that the value of supply have to include something. The inclusion is mentioned in section 15 subsection 2, and there is exclusion as well, particularly the discount etc., which is mentioned in section 15 subsection 3. So if we have to value, then we have to value as per the equation 15(1) plus 15(2) minus 15(3). This is the equation. We must memorize that: 15(1) plus 15(2) minus 15(3). That will be the value of supply. So before this, yes, the value of supply of goods shall be the transaction value. So by default, if nothing is mentioned, then by default transaction value shall be considered as the value of supply. But sometimes due to relationship, the value of supply may have been affected, and to save the taxes, someone may manipulate and reduce the value of supply. So legislature has considered those points, and according to valuation rule, if supplier and recipients are related persons and have manipulated the transaction price to reduce the tax liability, then open market value shall be considered as the value of supply. So suppose I am supplying mobile of a particular brand and particular specification to our customers for 15,000, and I have supplied to my relatives for only 12,000, then the tax to be, although I have to received amount from our relatives only 12,000 plus GST, but for the valuation of this supply, 15,000 shall be considered, because 15,000 is the open market value of the goods. So this point we must note that. Suppose I am a chartered accountant, I have filed a return of my relatives free, then the government will consider this view and this transaction as the return filing fee for other customers. Suppose I am filing return of income tax to other customers for 5,000, then on 5,000 I have to discharge the tax liability, although I have not received any consideration from our relatives. So this point we must note that. So this is the basic fundamentals of this valuation of supply. So generally, as a default rule, transaction price or transaction value shall be considered as the value of supply except the case where price is not the sole consideration and relationship, there is relationship between the supplier and recipient. Now, whenever we say the transaction value, so transaction value shall be considered the value of supply, and transaction value is the price actually paid or payable to the supplier of goods. So transaction value is the price paid or payable. So even if it is payable, it is the value of supply. So not necessary that the amount received only form part of supply, even though the amount receivable may also form part of value of supply. So suppose I have sold a mobile to some of our customers for 15,000, 10,000 I have received, 5,000 we have not received, then we have to discharge the tax liability. Not only for on 10,000 we have to pay the tax on 15,000 because the transaction price is 15,000, because the transaction price is the price which is actually paid or payable. That point we must note that. I have just discussed 15.1. Now I am proceeding further. The price is not defined, so you have to refer the dictionary meaning of the price, which is generally in the case of commercial transaction, it is based on the contract. So contract will determine how much price we have to pay for a particular supply of goods or services. And mind that it is not the money, even the money equivalent shall be considered. So in case of purchase of new car, suppose I have given old car and 10 lakh, then the value of supply shall be 10 lakh plus value of old car. That must be that for payment of tax. And consideration, importantly, consideration is the price paid to the supplier of goods or services. It is not the amount which is being paid by the recipient. So there may be situations where someone others may partially pay on behalf of recipient of supply. And mind that the consideration does not include the grant or subsidy paid by the government against the supply to be made, particularly in the case of solar plant or solar system or other like products, etc. So sometimes government gives some subsidy or grant. So subsidy or grant received from government never form part of the consideration, and therefore it is outside the provision of the transaction value. So on the grant amount or subsidy amount, there will be no GST at all. Now the inclusion portion is that any taxes other than GST to be included in the value of supply, then amount incurred by recipient which is liable to be paid by supplier must also be included. We will consider in detail this point. Then the incidental expenses like packing, commission charges, etc. At the time or before delivery or supply of services we must have to include. Then interest or late payment charges or late fee, etc. We have received, if or to be received, then it will be included in the value of supply. And subsidy directly linked to price other than the subsidy provided by the government, it will be included in the value of supply. And the exclusion, I am just referring to the exclusion so that it will be clear for all of you. Now the exclusion portion is exclusion portion. Just a minute. Yes, the exclusion portion is the discount. So there may be discount even known at the time or before supply effected. So any discount known before or at the time of supply to be reduced on the invoice itself. So suppose I have sold some goods for 100 and 10% discount provided then on the 90. So 100 minus 10 on the 90 we have to impose the tax of GST, and that amount will be only payable. So if the tax rate is 12%, so on 12% of 90, we have to discharge the tax liability. Similarly, a discount may be known at the time of supply but not recorded on the invoice. So we can issue credit note, etc. later on. So turnover discount or year-end discount, or there may be the discount based on the sales received, sales achieved. There are so many discounts linked with that. So all those discounts we have to reduce for taxes, because these are not forming part of our transaction value. In fact, the amount of discount the supplier will never receive. Since supplier will never receive, this amount should not form part of the value of supply for discharging of the tax. So the discount to be excluded. Now the only point we have to consider in details, that is the reimbursement of expenses. We must understand what is reimbursement of expenses. We have to highlight an example. We have to provide some example as well. So whenever we say reimbursement, reimbursement means the supplier is asking to pay some of the amount from the recipient on which supplier is not charging tax. Suppose I am a chartered accountant, I am providing a service of filing of income tax return, and I have deposited some tax on behalf of my client, and those taxes we are getting back from our client. Then on those taxes we have not to pay any tax of GST, because it is the amount to be reimbursed by my client as pure agent, because it is the obligation of the recipient to pay tax. Actually, it was the obligation of the recipient to pay tax, and those taxes not being paid by the recipient. So on the instruction of recipient, I have discharged the tax liability, and for that I have not charged any amount. So it will be covered as payment as a pure agent. So if obligation of recipient is being obligation of this recipient being met out by the supplier, then as a pure agent, then there is no question of any GST. Vice versa, if the obligation of supplier being met out by the recipient of supply, then we have to refer to the contract, because the contract will determine what are the obligation of supplier and what are the obligation of recipient. Suppose in a construction of house, the cement being provided by the recipient or the house owner, then in that case cement not to be included in the value of supply of the contractor. If the contract is inclusive one, where the cement to be all the cost of cement or expenditure of cement to be borne by the contractor, in that case, if the house owner has purchased the cement and provided those cement to the contractor, then the amount of cement to be included in the value of supply. So all this depends upon the nature of contract. So we have to refer the contract. If some obligation of supplier being paid by the recipient, then it will be included in the value of supply. If not, then it will not be included in the value of supply. So this point we must note that. So TCS, as we know that in the case of sale of car exceeding 10,000, the car dealer is collecting tax, and some other cases also there is TCS. So in such a case, whether tax GST will be applicable on TCS or not, answer is no. There is no tax on TCS. So I have just explained how the valuation will be there. And if any reduction in the price, then credit note will be issued. Section 34 has a specific provision for issuance of credit note. There are situations, 4 situations where credit note being issued by the supplier. First situation is if there is any reduction in the taxable value of, or there is any reduction in the tax rate, or if there is goods being returned by the recipient of supply, or there is deficient quality of goods or services. So in those cases, we have to issue credit notes, and By issuing credit notes, we can adjust our output tax liability, provided the service recipient or recipient of goods has also adjusted the input tax credit. So if he has reduced the input tax credit, you can also, the supplier can reduce the output tax liability, otherwise cannot. So I have just discussed all those provisions pertaining to. Then if the supplier and recipient are related person, or price is not the sole consideration, or transaction value is not available, and in some of the cases notified supply of goods or services, the government has made the valuation rule, and valuation rule are based on the open market price of those goods. So based on open market price, if related person in between related person, there is no transactions, or transaction is influenced by the relationship, or price is not the sole consideration, then valuation will be applicable, and accordingly there will be adjustment in the transaction price is available, or otherwise open market value shall be considered. For that, rule 27 to rule 35 has a specific provision for that. So I am just skipping those valuation rules. I think there are some specific valuation rule as well, particularly in the case of sale of second-hand goods. So in the case of second-hand goods, if the supplier has not availed any input tax credit, so in that case, on the differential amount, he has to pay the taxes. Suppose I am purchasing old printers and I am selling old printers, and at the time of purchase, I have not availed any input tax credit. Generally, the printers being sold by unregistered, then in such a case, we have to discharge tax liability on the differential amount if we have not availed any input tax credit. So second-hand goods we have just covered on that. In the case of repossession of goods from defaulting borrowers, in such a case also 5% per quarter shall be reduced, and the balance amount shall be considered as the value of those defaulted goods. On that, tax will be discharged by the company. Then I think I have covered all this. Yes. In the case of currency changes, they can discharge tax based on the valuation. That is, valuation is based on some principles where there is a mechanism for payment of tax on the currency conversion rate, or if that is not possible, then there is lump sum amount for currency conversion may be considered as. So up to 1 lakh of a currency conversion, 1% or 250, whichever is higher shall be the value of supply. If more than 1 lakh, less than 10 lakh, then 1,000 plus 0.5% shall be the value of supply. And in the case above 10 lakh, then 5,500 plus 0.10% of the gross amount shall be the amount of value of supply. So it is a calculation like that. In the case of air travel agent, it is 5% of the booking amount for domestic bookings, and in the case of international booking, 10% shall be the value of supply, and this is based and linked with the basic fare of that on which commission is being calculated. So I have covered up the entire valuation systems. Now I am referring to the another provisions, which is the exemption from GST to a small supplier. So a small supplier are exempted from GST. The threshold limit earlier originally was 20 lakh aggregate turnover, and for service provider it was originally it was the 20 lakh for sale of goods as well as service provided, but now it has been changed, and now for services it is 20 lakh, and for sale of goods it is 40 lakhs. And mind that this amount 40 lakh or 20 lakh is the aggregate turnover, means aggregate turnover on a single pan, and aggregate turnover, just we have discussed all the supply, whether exempted, nil rated, all these export, etc. All these will be exempted, all these will be clubbed, then the amount will be considered as aggregate turnover, So it is being revised. So now at present the threshold limit is 40 lakh for supply of goods and 20 lakh for supply of services. For a special category of estates, this limit being 10 enhanced to 10 lakh to 20 lakhs as well. For the goods and for services, it is still 10 lakh, etc. So you have to note that. So this is the exemption to a small supply I have just discussed. But one point is very important, that is exemption from registration. Since there is, if there is any exemption from registration, there is no liability of any GST, because exemption from registration means no GST liability at all. So who are exempt from registration? One, those who are engaged in non-GST supply of goods. So those supply of goods are outside the GST, then no registration is required, although their aggregate turnover is 40 lakh or 20 lakh, etc. The supply which is ultimately or exempt wholly from the GST, they are also not required any registration. Agriculturists are not required any registration, and government may notify some class of person not to have registration. And mind that those whose supply being the tax on supply being paid by the service recipient or recipient of goods under reverse charge scheme, they since they have not to pay tax, so since they have not to pay GST, no need of registration. So in a crux, you can say that those who are not liable to pay any GST, no need of registration is required. In this case, section 23 has specifically mentioned that we have just discussed that. Then the last point is the composition scheme. As we know that for a small taxpayer, there must be easy systems, because in GST there is complex valuation system, the complex mechanism of so place of supply rules, time of supply, everything is so complex. So for a small taxpayer or a small businesses, there must be easy system, so that they could be easily comply the provision of GST law. Way back in 1997, Honorable Supreme Court in the case of the state of Kerala versus Builders Association of India has held that there must be rough and ready method for a small business, so that they could roughly calculate the amount of tax and pay the tax. So accordingly, in VAT regime, service tax regime, or other regime, they have introduced the composition scheme as well. And in GST also there is composition scheme, considering the spirit of the judgment of this Honorable Supreme Court in the state of Kerala versus Builders Association. Now, whenever we say composition scheme, so composition in any tax laws have three wings. One is the valuation of supply and tax discharge thereon. So in the composition scheme, they have so simplified, and they have to pay only 1% on the turnover. So on 1% of the turnover is the tax, which is the simplest one. No typical calculation method. Secondly, they have to file only one return. So annual return is there, whereas other taxpayer have to file so many returns. And mind that the composition taxpayer have to pay tax quarterly, but return filing is only yearly one. And the simplification of the tax rate is that although the composition taxpayer is selling so many goods, but the tax rate is single, and that too is 1%, 0.5% CGST, 0.5% AGST. So composition dealer or composition taxpayer being simplified in three respects. Number one, they have to charge tax, they have to pay tax 1%, 0.5% CGST, 0.5% AGST. They have to pay tax on the turnover, and they have to file only one return in a year with payment of tax quarterly. And the turnover limit for composition scheme is 1.5 crore, which was earlier 75 lakh only. So later on it was enhanced, and the present limit is 1.5 crore. Now, composition scheme are generally to the manufacturer as well as the supplier of services, but supplier of services were initially restricted only in the case of this supply of restaurant service or hotel service, etc. only. So food items only were covered. Supply of food items were only covered earlier in the compulsion scheme, and that too at 5% tax rate, 0.5% CGST, 0.5% HGST. Now the government has simplified more, and other services are also covered in compulsion scheme. But for other services, the aggregate turnover limit is 50 lakh. So mind that this point is simple one. Although so a small service provider, they can avail the composition scheme, and for availing the composition scheme we have to file form CMT 01. But it is not necessary to file every year. If 1 year you have adopted the composition scheme, you can continue if other conditions are being fulfilled. So if the turnover increases beyond that, so you can be out of the composition scheme. So the limitations for the composition scheme that you can purchase interstate goods or services, but you cannot supply interstate. So you have to supply goods or services only within a state. So there is a restriction on the composition scheme. And mind that those manufacturers of ice cream, tobacco, or etc. product are not eligible for composition scheme. So general manufacturers are generally covered in this scheme. The tax rate is quite lucrative, which is 1% only. The in place of Innova as composition taxpayer have to issue documents which is bill of supply, and the 1% tax which he is paying have to pay on his own pocket. They cannot charge those taxes from other persons. So since they are not issuing Innova, so they cannot charge those tax 1% which he is paying from other person. So I have broadly covered the composition scheme as well. So all these details are there. You can go through in this, and mind that the casual taxable person or non-resident taxable person cannot opt for the this scheme. They are outside the scheme. Once you have opted for the composition scheme and earlier you are in regular scheme, so you have to revert the input tax credit pertaining to the raw material, semi-finished or finished goods in your hand. Or vice versa, if a composition scheme person opts to regular system of taxation, in that case there will be no question of any credit. So in such case, if composition to regular, so in the case of inputs in the raw material, finished or semi-finished goods, such taxable person shall be entitled for credit of that. So just we have, and in one state you have opted for the composition, you have to opt for composition in every state. So it is not a choice that one state you have opted for composition, in other state you have to go for regular. No. Either you have to be composition across India in every state, or you should be regular in across India in every state. So I have just discussed all those points. So just discussed, I think I have covered of entire provision of composition scheme. Almost provision I have considered. So and mind that on every document, signboard, etc., the composition taxpayer have to mention that I am a composition taxpayer and I am not entitled to collect tax from anyone, and GST number should be there. So I have covered up yes, this provisions, the entire provision of composition scheme. Now I am opening for the question answer sessions pertaining to that. Yes, any question, please? Yes, Dr. Ashutosh Misraji, please, any questions? I have unmuted. Yes. Any questions? Any question? Any of you have any question, please? Any of you have any question? Dr. Ashutosh Misraji, any question, please? Any member have any questions? Sir, please share PPT or screen. Okay, it is coming. Please unmute me. I have unmuted, sir. I have unmuted. It is muted from your side. I have unmuted, please. I have unmuted from my side. You are unmuted, please go ahead. Yes, you are, yes, please. I have unmuted all of you. You can ask any question. I have unmuted. Dr. Ashutosh Mishra ji, please. I have unmuted. You can ask question. From my side, all of you are unmuted. You can ask any question, please. I have unmuted all the participants. You can ask any question if you have. Yes. I am unmuted to all of you. You are hearing me? Any of the participants? Yes. I have unmuted all of you. You can ask any question you have. So far we have discussed. You can ask any question you have.
Sir, kindly help with the concept of sale of second-hand goods and the exemption over there.
Okay. So in the case of sale of goods, the valuation system is that if I am a dealer in second-hand goods, I am procuring those goods, and generally we are procuring those goods from unregistered person. So there is no question of any input tax credit on that. So government has made a valuation mechanism where on the difference, suppose I have procured second-hand goods, a printer we have purchased for 10,000 and that printer we have sold for 11,000. So I have to discharge the tax only on 1,000 since no credit is available to us. So government has made a system where if on the purchases we have not availed any input tax credit, then we can discharge the tax liability only on the differential amount. This is pertaining to second-hand goods because initially at the first time purchase, the goods being taxed. So on the second time, government has relaxed that. Yeah, and in the case of sale of car, if any businessman has purchased car, certainly they have not availed any input tax credit. So in the case of car, if they have sold those car above WDV, so written down value basis, then on the differential, suppose the written down value is 1 lakh and I have sold the car for 150, then on 50,000 we have to pay the tax. If we have sold those cars less than 1 lakh, so less than the WDV, then no tax we have to pay since at the time originally the tax being paid fully. So this is the system pertaining to second-hand goods. Yes. Any question, please? Yes. Hope I have cleared. Any question? Hope I am clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So any other question you have? You can ask freely any question. Even in Hindi you can ask. Not an issue. You can ask in any language. You have any questions you can ask. जी बताइए कोई क्वेश्चन और है?
No, sir.
नहीं कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है. I am facing a problem in unmuting myself. Okay. Please unmute to me. Okay, I have unmuted. I think from your side there is some problem. From my side, I have unmuted to all of you. I have not unmuted. Okay. So how I can help you? I think you should. Dr. Ashutosh Masraji, I think you should log out and then log in. Then it will be unmuted. I think if you have any problem, so you should log out and then log in so that it will be better for discussion. Yes, please. So far he is joining again. So Dr. Ashutosh Masraji, my advice is that you should log out and then log in on the same this ID. Then it will be beneficial to all of us. So other members, other participants have any questions, you can ask freely any questions without any hesitation. You can ask question even in Hindi. I have no problem in that. जी आप लोग बताएं, आप लोग के पास कोई क्वेश्चन है? कोई भी क्वेश्चन है आज के टॉपिक से या कल के टॉपिक से, आगे कोई टॉपिक से क्वेश्चन है वो भी आप पूछ सकते हैं. आपके पास जो भी क्वेश्चन है आप पूछ सकते हैं, तो आपको क्लैरिटी आ जाएगी. दिमाग में जो भी है आप पूछ लीजिए. जी कोई और क्वेश्चन है आप लोगों के पास? एनी क्वेश्चन? आप लोगों के पास कोई और क्वेश्चन है? हाँ, आप लोगों का कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है? खत्म हो गया क्वेश्चन आप लोगों के पास? हेलो
हाँ जी सर।
जी, आप लोगों के पास कोई भी क्वेश्चन नहीं है? खत्म हो गया क्वेश्चन? या आप लोग पढ़ नहीं रहे? कोई क्वेश्चन आप लोगों के दिमाग में आना चाहिए था। आप लोग तो नए लोग हैं, आपके पास बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन हो सकते हैं जीएसटी। आप कोई भी क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं, जो भी आपकी इच्छा हो, चाहे हमने आज पढ़ाया है या कल पढ़ाया या नहीं भी पढ़ाया, वो क्वेश्चन भी आपको आंसर मिल जाएगा। Oh, okay. So, Dr. Asutosh, hello, welcome. So, you can ask any questions you have. Yes.
हेलो
Yes, please, जी, please, please, जी।
हेलो, आवाज आ
जी
रही है?
बताएं प्लीज। जी आ रही है, खूब अच्छे से आ रही है, बताएं प्लीज।
मैं सर ये कह रहा था आपसे
जी
कि जनरली ना थोड़ा सा ये जो बिल ऑफ सप्लाई और जो इनवॉइस है,
हाँ,
इन दोनों में बच्चों को थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस बता
मैं
दीजिए।
बताता हूँ। अच्छा, हाँ, मैं इन बच्चों को पूछ रहा था, इनको आप अपने तरफ से भी बोल दीजिए जीएसटी के टॉपिक में कोई भी क्वेश्चंस है, क्योंकि इनका एक बार तो टॉपिक कवर हो गया है। इनके दिमाग में जो भी क्वेश्चन है कुछ भी पूछ सकते हैं, इनको पूरी फ्रीडम है।
जी
मैं एक्सप्लेन करता हूँ। देखिए,
जी
बिल और इनवॉइस में बेसिक डिफरेंस मैं तो काफी समय से बोल रहा था, और इंटरनेशनल लिटरेचर में ये पहले से ही था। जब हम इनवॉइस बोलते हैं, मतलब उसके ऊपर टैक्स जरूर लिखा होगा। जब भी किसी डॉक्यूमेंट्स पे टैक्स लिखा है, इसका मतलब वो इनवॉइस है। और यदि टैक्स नहीं लिखा है तो वो बिल ऑफ सप्लाई है। जीएसटी में एक और वैट रेजिम में पहले मैं ले जाता हूँ। वैट रेजिम में दो तरह के इनवॉइस थे, एक टैक्स इनवॉइस, एक डिटेल इनवॉइस। दोनों में ही टैक्स लिखा रहता था। फर्क इतना होता था कि यदि B2B सप्लाई है, मतलब दोनों वैट में रजिस्टर्ड हैं, तो टैक्स इनवॉइस था। और यदि दोनों में से एक रजिस्टर्ड था वैट में, मतलब B2C सप्लाई था, तो उसमें रिटेल इनवॉइस था। पर इनवॉइस का मतलब टैक्स होता है, उसमें टैक्स का एलिमेंट लिखा होगा। जब हम बिल की बात करते हैं, मतलब बिल में टैक्स नहीं लिखा रहता, तो जब भी हम बिल ऑफ सप्लाई बोलेंगे, मतलब उसमें टैक्स है नहीं। जैसे कंपोजिशन टैक्स पेयर है, वो कभी भी टैक्स नहीं लिख सकता। ही कैन नॉट चार्ज टैक्स। The 1% tax he is paying, he have to pay from own packet. Similarly, if the restaurant, someone is providing the services of restaurant, then he is paying tax of 5%, 0.5% CGST, 0.5% AGST. That 5% tax he cannot charge from customer. So he has mandatory to issue बिल ऑफ सप्लाई, नॉट इनवॉइस। सो बिल ऑफ सप्लाई में इतना अंतर है कि इनवॉइस में टैक्स रहेगा और बिल में कोई भी टैक्स नहीं रहेगा। ये क्लैरिटी है
जी, नहीं, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
जी। और यदि
हाँ,
एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाई में और थोड़ा और एक्सप्लेन कर दूं, यदि एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाई है, सप्लाई कोई एग्जेम्प्ट है जिसमें कोई जीएसटी नहीं है, वो भी बिल ऑफ सप्लाई है। यदि नील रेट है जिसमें कोई टैक्स नहीं लग रहा, वो भी बिल ऑफ सप्लाई है। सो जहां भी टैक्स नहीं लग रहा वो सब बिल ऑफ सप्लाई है, जहां टैक्स लग रहा वो इनवॉइस है। जी
जी सर।
प्लीज। जी
मैं बच्चों के पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से एक क्वेश्चन और पूछना चाह रहा था
जी बताइए ना प्लीज।
कि ये जो कंपोजिट सप्लाई होती है और मिक्स सप्लाई होती है,
हाँ 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 हाँ।
इन दोनों में क्या डिफरेंस है?
अच्छा, मैं ये भी समझाने की कोशिश करता हूँ। जो कंपोजिट सप्लाई है, उसमें कंपोजिट सप्लाई और मिक्स सप्लाई दोनों में एक से ज्यादा सप्लाई है। हमें ये ध्यान रखना पड़ेगा, जब सप्लाई एक से ज्यादा है तो कंपोजिट सप्लाई मिक्स सप्लाई का कॉन्सेप्ट काम आएगा। यदि सप्लाई ही सिर्फ एक है तो कंपोजिट और मिक्स का तो क्वेश्चन ही नहीं है। तो सपोज करिए कि हम एक सेल करने वाले फैक्ट्री वाले हैं, हमारे पास फैक्ट्री है, हम कोई सामान बेचते हैं। मान लीजिए हम मोबाइल बेचते हैं, तो हमें मोबाइल बेचते समय हमें हो सकता है कस्टमर ये बोले कि आप मोबाइल मेरे घर पे दीजिए। तो हमें क्या करना पड़ेगा, कुरियर का अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा। यदि सामान बहुत बड़ा है, मोबाइल के अलावा कोई और बड़ा सामान है, तो हमें ट्रांसपोर्ट का अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा। सो उसका यदि बीच रास्ते में खराब हो गया तो हमें इंश्योरेंस का भी अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा। तो एक सिचुएशन ये होती है कि हम कस्टमर के घर पे जाके डिलीवरी देंगे। दूसरा सिचुएशन हो जाता है कि कस्टमर हमारे पास आके हमारे यहाँ से सामान लेके जाएगा। तो यदि हमारे यहाँ से लेके जाएगा तो हमारे पास एक दो काम होगा। एक तो हम सामान देंगे, फिर उसकी जो हैंडलिंग का काम करना पड़ेगा और उसकी पैकिंग एक्सेट्रा करना पड़ेगा। तो इस सिचुएशंस में क्या होता है कि हमें तो सामान बेचने को उसने बोला है, लेकिन सामान हम ऐसे तो कोई नहीं दे देंगे, सामान तो पैक करके देना पड़ेगा। और सामान को कई बार हमें उसके घर तक छोड़ना पड़ता है। लेकिन अल्टीमेटली ये सेल ट्रांजैक्शन है, सेल ऑफ गुड्स है। तो इसको सिंप्लीफाई करने के लिए सरकार ने मैकेनिज्म बनाया कि यदि कई सप्लाई है और उसमें से कोई एक सप्लाई प्रिंसिपल सप्लाई है जिसके लिए कस्टमर और जो सप्लायर है दोनों एग्रीड हैं कि हमें सामान बेचना खरीदना है, या ये पर्टिकुलर सप्लाई इंपॉर्टेंट है। जैसे हम एक दूसरा एग्जांपल लेते हैं, या इसी एग्जांपल को पहले कंप्लीट करते फिर दूसरा एग्जांपल लेंगे। तो इस केस में क्या हुआ, कस्टमर ने यदि हमारे घर पे छोड़ने को बोला तो हमें ट्रांसपोर्ट का अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा या कुरियर का अरेंजमेंट करना पड़ेगा, कोई डिस्ट्रॉय हो जाए या कोई प्रॉब्लम हो तो इंश्योरेंस का करना पड़ेगा। सो हमने कई सारा काम किया, लेकिन हमारा जो मेन काम था, जो मुख्य काम था, वो सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स था। बाकी सब उसके साथ पैकिंग, हैंडलिंग, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन, इंश्योरेंस इंसिडेंटल था, एंसिलरी था, क्योंकि इसके बिना मेन सप्लाई हो नहीं सकती है। मेन सप्लाई को अचीव करने के लिए, पूरा करने के लिए मुझे ये करना पड़ेगा। तो गवर्नमेंट ने बोला कि इन सब में बहुत अलग अलग टैक्स लगाना पड़ेगा। कोई ट्रांसपोर्टर का टैक्स लगाएगा, फिर इंश्योरेंस का टैक्स अलग से लगाएगा, पैकिंग का अलग लगाएगा, हैंडलिंग का अलग लगाएगा, कोई एजेंट होगा उसका कुछ और लगाएगा। सो टैक्स रेट बहुत ज्यादा हो जाएंगे और बहुत सारी कॉम्प्लेक्स हो जाएगी। तो सरकार ने बोला कि इन सबको हम एक सप्लाई कंसीडर करेंगे। इट विल बी ट्रीटेड एज सप्लाई ऑफ गुड्स एंड द टैक्स रेट ऑन दोज different incidental supply of goods or services shall be forming part of that only, and the rate of tax will be the rate of tax of principal supply. So मोबाइल के आइटम पे मोबाइल का ही टैक्स लगेगा, साथ में पैकिंग वैकिंग जो भी करते हैं वो टैक्स रेट कोई रेलिवेंट नहीं है। इसी तरीके से, लेकिन कुछ ऐसा सिचुएशन हो सकता है कि हम कई सामान को इकट्ठा करके बेचते हैं। तो जब हम इकट्ठा करके बेचते हैं, जैसे पॉपुलरली गिफ्ट आइटम को बेचते हैं, इकट्ठा करके बेचते हैं, उसमें से कुछ आइटम के टैक्स अलग होंगे, दूसरे के अलग होंगे, तीसरे के अलग होंगे। तो इस केस में हाईएस्ट टैक्स रेट लगेगा। सरकार ने ऐसा बोला, यदि आप क्लब करके इकट्ठा करके बेचेंगे कंसोलिडेटेड, तो आपको हाईएस्ट टैक्स रेट लगाना पड़ेगा। ये कॉन्सेप्ट को मिक्स सप्लाई बोलते हैं। तो मिक्स सप्लाई का मतलब ये है कि उसमें कोई भी सप्लाई मेन सप्लाई नहीं है। यदि कोई भी मेन सप्लाई नहीं है तो आपके पास ऑप्शन क्या है? एक ऑप्शन ये है कि आप अलग अलग सबके टैक्स लगाए। तो अलग अलग टैक्स तब लगा पाएंगे जब आप अलग अलग सामान को बेचेंगे। मतलब कस्टमर को ऑप्शन है कि उन सारे सामानों में से कौन कौन सी सामान वो लेना चाहता है और कितनी लेना चाहता है। यदि ये ऑप्शन है तो अलग अलग टैक्स रेट लगेगा। यदि ये ऑप्शन नहीं है, आपने उसका पैकिंग इस तरीके से कर दिया कि कस्टमर्स को मैंडेटरी जितनी चीजें रखी है वो सारी इकट्ठा खरीदनी पड़ेगी, तो मिक्स सप्लाई का क्वेश्चन है। तो उसमें जो आइटम होगा उसका सबसे मैक्सिमम टैक्स रेट देखा जाएगा और मैक्सिमम टैक्स रेट उस पर लगा दिया जाएगा। तो इस तरीके का ये सिस्टम मिक्स सप्लाई और कॉम्पोजिट सप्लाई का है। प्लीज जी बताएं प्लीज।
जी सर,
क्लियर हुआ क्या? ये क्लैरिटी कुछ आ गई?
मेरे ख्याल से बच्चों क्लैरिटी आ गई आपको?
क्लैरिटी आई या नहीं आई?
हेलो बच्चों, आ रही है आवाज मेरी? क्लैरिटी आ गई आप लोगों को? अच्छा, इसके बाद सर बात आती है हमारी, हेलो
जी बताएं प्लीज। आ रही है आवाज? आ रही है? यस।
एक जीरो रेटेड सप्लाई होता है और एक एग्जम्प्ट सप्लाई होता है, इन दोनों में क्या अंतर है सर?
अच्छा, ऐसा है, जो जीरो रेटेड सप्लाई है इसका मतलब ये है कि उसमें इफेक्टिव टैक्स बर्डन जीरो है। इफेक्टिव टैक्स बर्डन जीरो है, मतलब टैक्स तो है लेकिन इफेक्टिव टैक्स बर्डन जीरो है। कैसे है इफेक्टिव टैक्स बर्डन जीरो? मान लीजिए हम कोई सामान का एक्सपोर्ट करते हैं, तो एक्सपोर्ट पे आप टैक्स तो नहीं ले सकते क्योंकि यू कैन एक्सपोर्ट द गुड्स, यू कैन नॉट एक्सपोर्ट टैक्सेस। तो दूसरे कंट्री में सामान जा रहा है तो दूसरे कंट्री के कस्टमर से आप टैक्स तो नहीं ले सकते, अदरवाइज ये टेरिटोरियल जुडिक्शन से बाहर हो जाएगा। सो यू कैन एक्सपोर्ट द गुड्स, यू कैन नॉट एक्सपोर्ट टैक्सेस। तो ये तो केस हो गया जीरो रेटेड का, क्योंकि एक्सपोर्ट के केस में क्या होता है कि हम जब एक्सपोर्ट करते हैं तो हमें टैक्स नहीं देना पड़ता है। तो दो सिचुएशन सरकार ने बोली है, या तो आप टैक्स लगाइए मत और जो इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट आपको लग रहा है वो सबका आप रिफंड ले लीजिए। दूसरा सिचुएशन ये है कि आप टैक्स लगा के बेचे लेकिन कस्टमर से टैक्स मत लीजिए, टैक्स हम पूरा आपको रिफंड दे देंगे जो है। तो इफेक्टिवली उसमें इफेक्टिव टैक्स जीरो है और ये दो केस में होता है, वन एक्सपोर्ट के केस में और दूसरा सप्लाई टू एसीजेड यूनिट और डेवलपर, बिकॉज फ्रॉम एसीजेड यूनिट अल्टीमेटली द गुड्स गोज टू outside India. So ultimate is the destination of those goods is the export itself. So in such a case the effective tax is zero. Whereas in the case of nil rated or exempted, there is no tax because the government itself has notified on those goods the tax rate is nil or it is fully exempt, so no tax at all. So the comparison you can make between these two, that in the case of zero rated supply on the domestic sale there is tax, whereas in the case of export, effectively government has neutralized the tax by way of refund. So whatever tax is there, the government will provide you the refund, so effective tax is zero. Whereas in the case of nil rate, the effective tax rate notified by the government is nil. So tax rate is nil, whereas in the case of zero rated, there is tax rate. If there is domestic supply of those goods, there is tax. In the case of export or supply to SEZ unit or developer, effective tax rate is zero by way of refund of the taxes. So this is the difference. जी
राइट सर,
जी, ये क्लियर हो गया कॉन्सेप्ट जी? और कोई क्वेश्चन है तो बताइए।
बस सर, ये बच्चों को कुछ थोड़ा सा बेसिक कॉन्सेप्ट क्लियर करने थे।
बिल्कुल सही।
राइट।
तो और कोई क्वेश्चन है आज इस पे खत्म किया जाए? कोई और क्वेश्चन तो है तो कर लेते हैं, नहीं तो मेरे ख्याल ज्यादा हो गया बच्चों के लिए। हाँ, हमें ऐसा लग रहा है कि ये जो कोर्स 3 दिन में किया गया है ये कुछ ज्यादा है। ये शायद बच्चों के एंगल से 3 दिन में शायद थोड़ा मुश्किल है, क्योंकि बच्चे इतना जो नहीं कर पाएंगे तो फिर वो भी ठीक नहीं है कि सारा पढ़ा दिया जाए और समझ कुछ भी नहीं है, उसका भी कोई मतलब नहीं है। जी तो लेकिन बच्चों को बोल दीजिए कि ये 2 काम करेंगे। एक काम तो ये करे कि जो YouTube चैनल में इस तरीके के जो हमने जितना डिस्कस किया और भी बहुत सारे वहाँ वीडियो हैं, ये YouTube में सब्सक्राइब कर लेंगे और अपना देखते रहेंगे। दूसरा ये कि जो क्वेश्चंस इनको और भी है किसी भी चैप्टर का, कल ये लेके आएंगे तो उनका क्वेश्चंस का आंसर कर देंगे। तो कल हम लोग इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट, जॉब वर्क, ये सब पे चर्चा करेंगे और बाकी जो बच गया है उस पर भी चर्चा करेंगे। और यदि आपको लगता है कि हाँ कुछ बच जाता है और कोर्स थोड़ा और आगे करना, तो एक आध दिन और आगे पीछे कर सकते हो, वो डिसीजन आप लोगों का।
राइट सर।
So thank you to all of you for participating in the program and providing me opportunity for explaining my views. Thank you to all of you.
Sir, thank you so much for sparing your valuable time for us.
Thank you.
And your time is important for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.